Welcome to the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Rosensweet, mom of 3 young people, peaceful parenting coach, and your cheerleader and guide on all things parenting. Each week, we'll cover the tools, strategies, and support you need to end the yelling and power struggles and encourage your kids to listen and cooperate so that you can enjoy your family time. I'm happy to say we have a great relationship with our 3 kids. The teen years have been easy and joyful, not because we're special unicorns, but because my kids were raised with peaceful parenting. I've also helped so many parents just like you stop struggling and enjoy their kids again. I'm excited to be here with you today and bring you the insight and information you need to make your parenting journey a little more peaceful. Let's dive into this week's conversation. Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Peaceful Parenting Podcast. I am so excited today to have one of my favorite mentors and people on our podcast, Lynn Lyons. Lynn and I had a very entertaining and educational and informative conversation about the 3 skills that our kids need to have if we want them to have good mental health and avoid mental health challenges, including anxiety. Y'all are going to seriously want to take notes on this one. It is so good. Lynn is a psychotherapist, author, and speaker in Concord, New Hampshire, and she's been in private practice for over 30 years. She specializes in the treatment of anxiety disorders in adults and children. She also travels globally as a speaker and trainer on the subject of anxiety, its role in families, and the need for a preventive approach at home and in schools. She's the author of one of my absolutely favorite parenting resources for parents of anxious children or people who are in anxious families, and it's called Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents, 7 Ways to Stop the Worry Cycle and Raise Courageous and Independent Children. If you know me and my work, you hear me recommending this book all the time, and you hear me talking about Lynn's strategy, the worry brain. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to let you know about a free workshop that I am running coming up, and it is totally free, and it's a really great workshop. And if you want to raise great kids using the peaceful parenting method, but you're not quite sure how to get kids to listen and cooperate without using conventional, traditional methods like yelling and threats and consequences, you are going to want to come to my Peaceful Discipline workshop. As I said, it's totally free. There are 2 different dates and times to choose from. It's going to be live with me on there answering your questions, but you can also get a replay if you can't make the dates or the times. Just run over to sararosensweet.com/peaceful if you want to join us for Peaceful Discipline, learn how to raise great kids without yelling, threats, or consequences. It's going to be a really great workshop, and I hope to see you there. Again, that's sararosensweet.com/peaceful. You can sign up for free, reserve your spot at that address. So let's dive into this conversation. I hope you both laugh and learn as much as I did. And I would love to hear any thoughts that you had. What did this podcast bring up for you? Where do you want to introduce some of these ideas? You can join us in our free Facebook group, which is a wonderful resource and support for parents just like you on this parenting journey. You can find us at Peaceful Parenting with Sarah Rosensweet on Facebook. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's dive in and meet Lynn and find out exactly what those 3 things are, those skills that our children need to have great mental health and avoid developing anxiety. Hi, Lynn. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. I am a big fan of yours and a follower of your podcast, Flusterclux, which is so wonderful. And I don't know if you know, my dad is the one who told me about you. He saw you at a network symposium conference years ago and said, you have to check out this woman, Lynn Lyons. She's so great and she's so funny. That's what really stood out to my dad.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, hi to your dad. Thanks for spreading the love, Dad.
And he was excited to hear that you were coming on the podcast. So he doesn't really listen to it, but he'll probably listen to this one.
Yeah, my husband doesn't listen. I joke my husband doesn't listen to the podcast, and I don't even know if he knows what a podcast is. But my parents listen, and my mom generally has feedback and comments, which is funny. And I've said this on the podcast before. She always sort of chides me if I swear, but man, oh man, that's where I learned to swear. So I guess she wants me to just be she wants me to be more polite when I'm on my podcast than we are in real life.
She's worried it would be a poor reflection on her of how she raised you, right?
Right. But I'm very clear that the swearing I do has come straight from Kathleen Murphy's mouth. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So what I was hoping we could talk about today is what you call your big 3, your triad of flexibility, autonomy, and problem solving. And I've heard you talk about this before, and that these are the three skills that our kids need to have if we want to help them have really great mental health and avoid mental health challenges, including anxiety, but other challenges as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. And as a therapist, I'm very skill based. So I'm always looking at what do we want to teach kids? What do they need to know as they move forward? So those are the big three. The risk factors that we see for kids developing anxiety and depression, there's plenty of them, and they're really well researched. And so when we look at flexibility, obviously the opposite is rigidity. When we look at autonomy, the opposite is not being able to explore the world or have a sense of mastery. And we know that that really happens in anxious families a lot. And then one of the other things we know in anxious families is that independent problem solving isn't really allowed, or it's not something that parents feel comfortable teaching their kids or even know that they're supposed to teach their kids that. So those are the three things. And when we see anxiety and depression developing, that's where we see rigidity, we see a lack of independent problem solving, and we see a sense of not having confidence moving out into the world.
Okay, great. Well, let's start with flexibility.
Okay.
And what I think might be a nice sort of framework is maybe you could give some examples of some trouble spots that maybe anxious parents do that don't allow for that, or that don't encourage that flexibility, and maybe what the opposite might be.
Okay. So when we talk about flexibility, one of the things I'll just say up front is that oftentimes when I'm talking about flexibility, people will think that I'm talking about chaos. So when I talk about flexibility, this happens a lot when I talk with if I'm talking to teachers, they're like, so we're not supposed to have plans? We're not supposed to have a schedule? We're not supposed to, and no, that's not it at all. Flexibility doesn't mean chaos. It means handling things that don't go the way you expect. It means stepping back and looking at things from different perspectives. It means adjusting and adapting. It really is flexibility happens in the context of really appropriate boundaries and expectations and schedules, right? I mean, you and we did a lot of planning to make this happen. We didn't just decide this morning that we were going to hang out together. Flexibility says when things don't go the way you expect, how do you manage that, both emotionally and socially? Because all of these skills, and flexibility is a big one in this category, have an impact on relationships. So when people are rigid, when they're anxious, that impacts the way that you relate to other people. It impacts how you communicate. It impacts what you allow yourself to do. And so if we talk about rigidity as the idea that you're walking life on a tightrope, I say to parents, I want you to imagine life not walking a tightrope, but walking across the Brooklyn Bridge or walking across the Golden Gate Bridge. And that there certainly are boundaries. We don't want to fling ourselves over the side of the bridge, but we can have more room to deal with things. And that's what flexibility is. Not that you don't plan a trip and that you show up at the airport on time and that you pack what you need to pack, but what happens if the flight is delayed? What happens if you forget to pack your toothbrush? What happens if you get to the hotel and it's not at all what you expected? How do you manage that flexibly? That's the skill that we're talking about.
And I think what I see a lot is for parents who have kids who are a little less flexible, it's also in things don't going the way, not only the way you expect, but the way you want. The way, like,
right.
You don't get what you want.
Right. Yeah. So as a parent, how do you talk to your child about flexibility? Again, we want to empathize. We want to validate. I know you're really disappointed that this didn't happen, or I know you'd really like this. But right now, we're going to manage this by being more flexible. So I know you wanted to wear those socks, or I know you wanted to leave at this time, or I know you we made plans to go do this thing. And now we've got to bring the dog to the vet because he got stuck by porcupine quills, whatever comes up. Acknowledging that you're going to feel disappointed, and yet we're going to have to be flexible with the way that our day goes. And so it can be in little ways and big ways, for sure.
So do you recommend that parents actually use that word flexible, and we're going to have to be flexible?
Yeah. Yep. I talk about being uncooked spaghetti versus being cooked spaghetti. Somebody in one of my consult groups works in a school, and she She uses pipe cleaners and popsicle sticks, which is less messy, I would imagine, than having kids play with uncooked spaghetti. So kudos to her for figuring that out. But yeah, we're going to talk about being flexible and even giving kids warnings ahead of time that, all right, you guys, we're stepping into a situation here right now where I need us to really be flexible, so that we're giving them a heads up that this is going to require some flexibility. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We don't know exactly the details of everything that we're going to do, or we do know the details because we're going to go to this person's house and they're not an easy person to get along with. So we're really going to have to be flexible as we move through this. I think that it is a value that you want to really talk about and promote, I guess, for lack of a better word, in your family, that when you see a child being flexible, you say to them, I really appreciate how flexible you were with this. I am so grateful for you for being able to handle what really was a difficult situation, or thank you so much for helping me out with this. I know that required a lot of flexibility from you. And then the converse of that is, if you've got a child who's being really rigid, you can talk to them about being uncooked spaghetti. And you can also say to them, it looks like you're stuck. It looks like you're stuck in the way you want things to go, or it looks like you're stuck in the way you expected things to go. And I understand that. How can we be flexible right now? And the more you talk to kids about that, the more they hear from you that it's something that you in your family value. That's a wonderful value for your family to have. It's a wonderful thing for kids to learn. And again, because relationships and connection are so important, rigid people are hard to deal with. It's just hard to deal with someone who's so rigid.
I think as adults, we're probably flexible a lot of times throughout the day without even realizing it. So sometimes I tell my clients, share with your kids, like, I really wanted to make, and I probably learned this from you, I really wanted to make a green salad tonight for dinner, but we're out of lettuce. So I'm going to have to be flexible and we're going to have broccoli instead.
Right. Right. And that's one of the assignments that I give kids a lot, give families a lot, is talk about the unexpected thing of the day that happened and how did you handle it? Which is an assignment that, we're going to talk about autonomy and problem solving too. But that assignment, that practice covers a lot of ground, because basically you're saying something happened. What did you have to do to manage?
I think I've heard you say to have a wall of flexibility in your house
Yes.
where you put
Yep.
a Post-it note. Every time
Mm-hmm.
someone's flexible, you put a Post-it note. And I don't know, maybe you could just give a little bit more instruction on how that works.
Yeah. So if you're dealing with any child, of course, but it may be that you've got a child that, oh gosh, he tends to be a little rigid. So yeah, so make a wall of flexibility. Pick a door in your house, pick the pantry door, the bathroom door, get a whole bunch of colorful sticky notes. And every time somebody in the family manages something flexibly, you just write a few words about it, like use the blue cup when they wanted the red cup, or waited for me while I did this because we had to, and you just put a few words and you just put it up there. And then you can make it a game. Rewards are fine if they're short term and if they're very small, right? So sometimes I know that there's a lot about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. But when we're trying to teach a behavior, or when we're trying to reinforce a behavior, sometimes a little treat just keeps everybody interested. We all know that sticker charts and that kind of stuff, the average span of a successful sticker chart is about 2 weeks. So you can do it in a way that just makes it a consistent value. You don't have to do it of like, okay, so if you get 5 stickies, then we're going to give you this Lego set, right? But you can say, oh my gosh, tonight, everybody, let's all gather around and look at this wall of flexibility. Isn't this fabulous, right? And maybe let's give ourselves a round of applause, and you play some music and you jump around, or just make it fun and make it enjoyable. And I tell actually classroom teachers to do that a lot as well, to have a wall of flexibility. And sometimes if you've got one child that you're dealing with specifically, you could make it a jar of flexibility. But I tend to like, in families, I tend to like to have that visible to everybody and to have it shared with everybody. Because who can't benefit from learning how to be more flexible, right?
Yeah, for sure. And just like a final thing I want to ask you about with the flexibility is, I think when you have anyone in your family who's anxious, parents or kids or both, that there's tend to be a lot of trying to plan out every minute. I've heard you talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
And how that really, it makes people feel better in the short run, but it gets in the way of them developing flexibility. So what are some ways that parents can include that unknown that, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in their daily practice.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful point you bring out, because not only do families try and do that because they're trying to make sure that they don't anger the anxiety, the cult leader, as I call it, but schools do that all the time. So you've got a child that's particularly rigid, or a child that has difficulty with unexpected events. And the accommodation we put in place is, let's make sure that they know exactly what's going to happen. And that's what I call doing the disorder. So you are actually feeding into the behavior that ultimately we want to try and lessen. So we really want to pay attention to that. I see that all the time. So what we want to do is we want to say, we are going to revel. We are going to, the phrase I use often is, we're going to roll around in the mights and maybes of life. And so when your child is asking a question and they're saying, what time are we going to leave? 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 You say, oh my gosh, well, look, the plan is we're going to leave at around 1:30. That's the plan, right? It's perfectly fine to give the information. I need to know what time I'm going to leave for things. If they're asking it repeatedly, if they're being demanding about it, you want to say, first, I've given you the information and it sounds like now your worry really has to be sure. And I say, if worry had a t-shirt, it would say, are you sure? Right? That's what it would say on the t-shirt. Are you sure? So you want to say to kids, look, this is the plan, and we're going to have to roll around in the mights and maybes of life. This is a time where flexibility is going to be really helpful. I need you to be cooked spaghetti here, not uncooked spaghetti. And let's just see how we can manage not knowing exactly what's going to happen. The more anxious the family, the more they try and make sure that everything goes as planned. And that's how this thing keeps going.
Right. And it gets stronger that way too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, because that becomes the expectation. I can't do something unless I know exactly what's going to happen. And parents will do it. I get why they do it. They're trying to make sure that they're just trying to keep the train on the tracks, right? We're just trying to keep the wheels on the bus. Schools do it. Parents do it. A lot of clinicians do it. I see it all the time. Right? The parents say, oh, my child is so anxious about this. Well, make sure that you give them a lot of warning, that you give them a lot of scaffolding, that you let them know exactly what's going to happen. Nope, nope, nope. Again, we're not trading it in for chaos, but we're saying this is the plan, but we're going to be flexible about it. That's the language that you want to use.
Perfect. Let's move on to autonomy.
So good old autonomy. Autonomy means that you have a sense of independence. You have a sense of mastery. The thing that we want to remember about autonomy is that it is developed in stages over time. So again, it's not this all or nothing thing. You could see me, Sarah, you can hear me sort of giving these sort of warnings ahead of time, because I know that anxious parents go all or nothing on me all the time. So they're like, okay, fine. So I'm supposed to leave my 4-year-old home alone, right? And they say, okay, so fine. So my 13-year-old's supposed to get his own apartment? No. We do it in steps that are appropriate developmentally. And what you want to look for as a parent is opportunities to let your child do things independently without you correcting, without you managing, without you stepping in, without you telling them the sequence of things. You want to let them do things independently as early as possible and as developmentally appropriately as possible. So it just, Maria Montessori said a gazillion years ago, never do for a child what he or she can do for him or herself. Let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you start very early on, and if you let them do it wrong, if you let them do it messy, if you let their socks not match, if you let their hair be a mess, if you let their, my son wore his little underwear on the outside of his pants for a really long time.
Just like as a fashion choice?
I believe it was a fashion choice. The thing about underwear and I don't know, I haven't had little boys in a long time. Mine are 21 and 23 now, but they were really cool underwear because they were like superhero underwear.
Oh, yeah. Underoos.
Yeah. He didn't want those hidden from the world. Are you kidding me? Right? He's got the coolest Superman underwear. He wants the world to see it. Right? And people would say to me, like, I remember him being on a plane and he gets on and he has on his little 3-year-old blue jeans with his underwear on the outside. And parents were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. You let him do that. And I thought, like, really? Like, it wasn't really a decision that I had to struggle with to let him wear his underwear on the outside. So letting them explore, letting them figure things out, letting them go a little bit farther, particularly if you're an anxious parent, letting them go a little bit farther than your anxiety feels comfortable with.
There's a great quote from Alfie Kohn. He says, kids should have the power to make decisions that make us gulp a little bit.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's interesting because the research about letting kids go distance from you, so it might be in their neighborhood or in their yard or whatever, they've studied that. And the distance that parents allow their kids to venture from them over the last 2 decades has just gotten smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
technology hasn't done us any favors either with that, because I see so many parents who want to track their kids, like
Mm-hmm.
even their high school kids.
Oh, and it doesn't. Yeah. So don't get me started on the tracking apps. But
Well,
I
I
say,
would love for you to talk about that a
oh,
little
all
bit,
right, all
because
right,
I think that's a really important part of autonomy. I
okay,
think kids should have time where they are not under the adult gaze. And,
correct,
of course, in an age appropriate manner,
exactly.
but kids need to be unsupervised sometimes.
Yeah. And as you become an adolescent, you're also supposed to do things that your parents don't know about. Right? I mean, if you think about your upbringing, if you think about all of you that are listening, if you think about you as a teenager, doing things that your parents don't know about is a part of figuring things out and making mistakes and having those close calls. That's what makes anxious parents anxious. But the goal is not to create a child or then a teenager or then an adult who is being watched all the time. So tracking devices, so Life 360 and that kind of stuff, it's interesting because I was saying this for a while, just clinically, I was recognizing that parents had all sorts of excuses about why they needed to do it at a certain age, and that when their child got to another age, they would stop. So I only needed to do it until then, or I only will do it until then. And what the research is showing is that they don't stop. So when they go to college, they don't stop. I've had parents who have young adults who are in PhD programs, and the parents are still tracking. The other thing, too, which I hope gives parents pause about this, is that we are modeling the behavior that you need to know what the people you love are doing all the time. And if your 16-year-old came home and said, "Oh my gosh, I've just started, going out or dating or having, whatever term they're using. But I've just got this new boyfriend or I've just got this new girlfriend and she's so amazing and we've decided that we're going to track each other."
Oh, that's so creepy when you put it that way.
Yeah, because she wants to know where I am all the time. Or, "Mom, he wants to know where I am every minute because he loves me so much. He wants to make sure he knows where I am." That is becoming a thing now.
Wait, are you
That
serious? I thought you
I,
were joking.
no, I'm serious. I'm
Oh my
serious.
gosh.
Yeah, that's becoming a thing. And not only in sort of, romantic relationships. I'm using all these euphemisms that my husband would laugh at. We always say like dating in quotes, like, yeah, he's really dating her.
You know what? They use that now, though. My 14-year-old talks about people who's dating
Oh,
each other.
yeah, but they're not really dating. So yeah, that's the joke is, instead of
Okay,
like, oh,
okay, I get it.
they're dating. Oh yeah. My husband will say, yeah, like, yeah, he's dating the heck out of her. So, but they're doing it with friendships. They're doing it with, platonic friendships. Friends are tracking each other. And then in dating relationships, they're tracking each other. So think about it. If you were 5 or you were 10 or you were 11 and your parents tracked you, you normalize that amount of information, you normalize that lack of autonomy, and then they just bring it into their own relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so autonomy, just to like backtrack a little
Yeah.
bit, like
Yeah.
letting people make decisions that
Mm-hmm.
matter at an age
Yep.
appropriate level. And what I
Yep.
always tell parents is if it's not dangerous or hurtful to themselves or other people, then let them just decide. Underwear on the outside of the pants,
Right.
maybe even I'm trying to think of an old, not doing their homework,
Right.
that
Right.
it's their life, they decide.
Right. And that's one of the things too, is that when we remove autonomy, we remove the development of cause and effect. And so if we're talking about adolescent brains, they're not so good with cause and effect. So of course we want to step in, like you say, if it's dangerous or that kind of stuff. I see teenagers riding their bikes all the time with their helmets unbuckled, right? And that's such a good example of lack of cause and effect. It doesn't matter if you have the helmet on, if it's not buckled under your chin. But if we don't let kids experience cause and effect, they're not going to develop the ability to make good decisions for themselves. So if you never let your kid, a teenager decides they're not going to do their homework, and then they go into school, and then all their friends say like, "Oh, I did the homework." And then the teacher says, "You didn't do the homework." And they feel regret, or they have to make it up, or there's some sort of consequence. That's how we develop cause and effect. A lack of autonomy gets in the way of developing that. And man, is that important skill to have in life, right? That what you do has an impact in the future, or that if you make this decision and then you have to pay a price, maybe you won't make that decision again in the future. So it's hard for parents because you're basically saying, I'm going to let you screw up in a way, like you say, that isn't dangerous or isn't harmful, but I'm going to let you screw up. I'm going to let you pay the price. I'm going to let you experience the consequence because that's how you learn.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, I think the research shows that not having a sense of control over your life is one of the most stressful things we experience as humans.
That's right.
And that feeds into that depression and anxiety of, that I don't have control. And there's all these studies with rats and that they just give up. And
it's called learned hopelessness and learned helplessness.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you don't think that you have any choice, when you don't think you have any autonomy, you don't take any action. And the thing we really want to pay attention to in both anxiety and depression, if we're talking prevention, is passivity, right? So if the t-shirt for anxiety is, "Are you sure?" The t-shirt for depression is, "Why bother?"
Right.
And we know that anxiety leads to depression because you just get overwhelmed, you get exhausted, you start pulling back, you start making your world smaller and smaller. And that very quickly, particularly with teenagers, leads into that place of why bother.
Mm-hmm.
So autonomy is really at the core of giving kids this opportunity to be active, to have agency. There's another really interesting research that's been done, Sarah, that we wrote about in Anxious Kids, Anxious Parents, where they looked at kids that were allowed to disagree, voice their opinions, take a stand with their parents. So this ties in the rigidity and the autonomy, the flexibility and the autonomy. Parents that are very rigid in their beliefs, parents who don't let their kids disagree with them in a respectful way, parents that don't let their kids veer off and make different decisions and try different activities, parents that are very rigid about how their child is to behave and what their child is to do. Those kids, parental control is a risk factor for anxiety for sure. But interestingly, this research also found that kids who don't have the opportunity to say no to their parents don't say no to peer pressure. So if we're looking at the development of skills that help a young person say no to drugs, say no to taking unreasonable risks, say no to doing things that are going to cause problems, the kids that practice it at home in a respectful way do much better when they're confronted with that when they're out in the world with their peers. And don't we all want our teenagers to be able to say, "No, that's stupid, I'm not doing it"? You got to give your kids the opportunity to work that muscle when they're at home so they know that it exists. They have a voice when they're out in the world.
That's really super good motivation for us as parents, I think.
It is.
I think, I can't remember if I heard this from you or somebody else, but just talking about risk for a second, when we're talking about autonomy. And I think that the research shows that if you don't let kids experience risk when they're younger, then it just pushes it off till when they're older and they're out of our sight. And, the consequences for risky teenage behavior are much greater than the 4-year-old who wants to climb to the top of the play structure. And maybe you're feeling a little bit nervous about that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there's two sides of that coin. So we know that kids raised in anxious environments perceive the world as a more dangerous place. So they're giving, there's a lot of safety chatter. So a lot of warning messages, a lot of be careful, a lot of watch out, a lot of stranger danger stuff. Those kids don't develop the ability to assess reasonable risk. So it can go in two directions. One direction it can be is that without the ability to assess reasonable risk, they're going to take no risk. and that shuts them down. So they're kids that aren't going to get their driver's license. They're not going to leave home. They're not going to step into situations that feel uncertain. And then the other side of the coin is if you don't have the ability to assess reasonable risk, if you're not is sort of leaning toward the anxious place, then you may lead toward the place of taking too many risks and not being able to figure out what's too much for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you get those two sides of the coin. And it depends, because we know in a family, there could be one child that temperamentally is much more sort of reserved or tends to be more anxious. And you've got another kid in the same family that is much more of an extroverted daredevil. Both of those kids need to develop the skill of assessing reasonable risk because we don't want them to do too little. And again, we don't want them to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, and again, I'm not sure if I heard this from you or somebody else, but asking kids when they're doing something like climbing really high on a play structure or something, like asking them, do you feel confident or do you feel safe in what you're doing, and getting them to check in with themselves.
Yes.
And teaching that skill of assessing the situation.
Yes. Yes. How do we assess the situation? And then the other thing that we want to do is that when a child is taking a bit of a risk, like one of those risks that make us gulp with little kids, we want to verbalize the skill that we're hoping they're paying attention to. So say a little child is climbing up on the jungle gym, right? A little bit higher than makes us comfortable. Instead of saying, oh, be careful, you might fall, we want to say, look at you paying attention up there.
Mm-hmm.
Look at you holding on. Look at that grip strength. Wow, what a capable little monkey you are, right? So we're saying to them, and we're even creating the little image in their brain and the words that you say go into their little brain and then come right out in their hands. So I tell this story of my younger son was a climber, and walking in and seeing that he was up on the railing of the stairs on the second floor on the wrong side of the railing. And of course, I'm running up the stairs to grab him. And as I'm running up the stairs, I'm saying, wow, you are a great climber. Look at you holding on, rather than saying, don't let go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on to problem solving.
All right. So problem solving. So the development of independent problem solving. One of the things from lots of research is that anxious families aren't so good at this. Independent problem solving. And we can certainly figure out why. If you're an anxious parent, you're afraid your child's going to fail. You're afraid something bad is going to happen. You're afraid that things aren't going to go the way that you want them to go. And so rather than giving kids room, this is why it's so connected to autonomy. See, all of these things they overlap, don't they? If you're not allowing your child to independently problem solve, if you're not teaching them that skill, then they're not going to learn how to do it. So you send them off to college and they don't know how to do a lot of things. So I am seeing this more and more. Somebody wrote an article recently about sending kids off to college and thinking that getting them through the application process is what we have to do so that they're successful in college. More and more parents doing the application for your kid. And really sort of the moral of the story is if your kid can't fill out the college application, probably going to have a little difficult actually doing college. Right. And the same can be said for jobs, right? So you want your child to get their first job. Maybe they're going to go work in a restaurant or whatever. Having them problem solve to figure out, how do I reach out? What do I have to do? It doesn't mean that we don't coach them and tell them what the steps are, but then backing off and letting them figure it out. Mm-hmm. So problem solving is, and again, you mentioned earlier how technology has so gotten in the way of this. But if I ran out of gas, which I did when I was a teenager, if I got a flat tire, which I did when I was a teenager, if I forgot about an exam, which I did when I was a teenager, I had to figure that out. And we want to do it ahead of time. So we want to look for opportunities to talk about cause and effect and to look at what's referred to as sequencing. So this is what we do first. This is what we do second. This is what we do third. Teachers do this all the time. They're teaching sequencing all the time. How do we let kids figure out? So my son would absolutely die if he knew I was telling you this. But the reason he started wearing his underwear on the inside was because the zipper from his little pants
Oh no.
kept scratching his poor little penis. Right? So he'd be like, "Mommy, my pee-pee hurts." And I'd say, "Why do you think that is?" And he'd be like, "I don't know." So I'd say, "I think your zipper is rubbing a little bit."
Mm-hmm.
And at first he was like, "No, no, no," right? He really wanted to wear his underwear on the outside. I think after a period of time, he realized, gosh, this discomfort I'm feeling is not really working for me. So being able to let them step in and figure that out.
I had an example of that this morning. My daughter had a form for participating in some after school sports. And she said, I have to bring this to school today, but I don't know who to give it to. And without thinking first, I said, well, what about your gym teacher? Probably you should give it to your gym teacher. And then I'm like, oh, wait, why am I telling her what to do?
Right,
and then
right.
I said, so then I caught myself and I said, if your gym teacher isn't the right person to give it to, who do you think you could give it to?
Yes.
Because then I almost said, well, if it's not the gym teacher, why don't you go to the office? And I'm like, no, Sarah, don't say that. And she said, well, I could probably go to the office. And I'm like, great. And she said, and then they could maybe tell me who to give it to if they're not the right person.
Exactly. And that's the language of sequencing, right? So she says, I don't know who to give it to. And then you might say, well, I'd start with your gym teacher. And then if that's not the right person, who would you go to next?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do you do next? Because problem solving is all about figuring out, what do I have to do next? What's the action I have to take, or what's the question that I have to ask? What's the information that I need in order to move through this? And being able to cue kids. The other thing I want to say too, as we're talking about this series, you said, oh, I can't believe I said, oh, the gym teacher. You're not going to be perfect at this. And I say to parents all the time, small adjustments count. So when you catch yourself, and you can even say out loud, you can say, oh gosh, listen to me just sort of stepping in and trying to solve this problem for you. Right? I take it back. I'm sucking back in my words, right? I mean, you could just joke with them. And I've even said to my kids at times, like, I so want to tell you exactly what to do right now. I could solve this problem for you. I really, really could. And I say that out loud. I used to say to my boys when they got their driver's license, which if you're a parent and you haven't had a 16-year-old boy with a driver's license, have fun. But I mean, talk about gulping. But I would say to him, I had given him all the instruction. I'd given him all the problem solving stuff. It wasn't like I sent him out into the world unprepared. But when I would hand him the keys, I would say, speech, 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 like that. Speech, 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 because he knew what I wanted to say and he knew what I was going to say. I just didn't feel like I needed to say it again. So
Right.
I was basically saying to him, you have the information. So please, in your little adolescent brain, pull it up when necessary. But I would hand him the keys and say, speech, speech, speech. And then the other thing that we said to my boys all the time, and this is really, my husband gets credit for this, is he would say to them as they were going off to do something, think one step ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's problem solving language.
Mm-hmm.
Think one step ahead.
I was going to say, you could build that in your kids. And I always say to parents, two of my favorite words are, I wonder. Right? I wonder what you could do if that happens.
Yeah.
Or I wonder what the best thing to do is here. Or I wonder who you could give that form to. Because sometimes it's so hard not to say something.
I know.
That something could be an invitation and curiosity to invite their problem solving skills to take over.
Right. Because you're cueing them. Again, it's not all or nothing. It's not like we're saying like, well, figure out the world on your own, little fella. And the other thing too, related to that, I love that. I use that a lot too. I wonder, is to stay away from after the fact. So say they screw up, right? Say they didn't do it. Say you said, you need to deliver this form to the gym teacher. And then she comes home and says, I didn't do it. Avoid those why questions. Why didn't you do it? Right? Because that's implying when we say that to our partner, why can't you remember blah, blah, blah? It really is just a way of saying, because I'm dumb or because I forgot or because I'm an idiot. You ask the how question and you say, okay, so we want this form to get in. How did you make a decision? Or how can we do this differently next time? Because that prompts problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because kids are going to screw up. They screw up all the time. We screw up all the time.
I think the other danger with, they come home and they didn't do the thing is we want to make sure they understand. And so we tend to pile on.
Yeah.
But if we pile on, then they're just resentful of us. And that actually is going to shut down they're just going to put their energy into, instead of that regret or how could I do it differently? They're just going, I can't believe my mom is such a jerk. And she's just like, telling me I told you so.
Right. I say to parents all the time, particularly if you tend to be an anxious parent that wants to get in there and solve the problems, I say it is really helpful for you to talk 85% less, right? Just stop talking and give your kids some room. So if, say, they forgot to do something or say they screwed something up and you say, well, how could you do it next time? And they go, stop saying that. Or, okay, make me feel bad, Mom. Yeah, it's my fault, blah, blah. Say, no, I'm just asking you to think. So I'm just going to give you some space and time because I think you need a little room in your own brain to think about this. And this is part of being a kid. So have at it. Right. So we just got to give them space sometimes. And I'm a talker. Sometimes I just have to shut up.
Yeah.
And it's really fine to give them that space.
Well, and I think we can empathize too. Like, say my daughter comes home and she's like, I didn't turn in the form. Like, oh no. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Right.
And then when we empathize, when there's a problem, that's also when kids move into the problem solving mode.
Yeah.
Because they feel like we're on their side and they feel like supported just because we're empathizing with them.
Mm-hmm. In my practice, when kids are telling me this or this, I say all the time, and it's true when I say it, I know exactly how that feels.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly how that feels. So then whatever suggestion I'm giving after that, or we're going to go into problem solving, or we're going to talk about what worked and what didn't work, they've already heard me say, I get it.
Yeah.
Versus me saying, why can't you do that? Which is the way, even if we don't say that directly, that's how it goes through their little translator brain, right? Why didn't you do that? I know exactly how that feels. Oh, or I say, oh boy, I've been there. And I have all sorts of stories I can tell kids. The other day I was flying to Philadelphia. I had to switch rental cars because the car they gave me, there was something wrong with it. So I'm ready to go out and they go, oh, wait, come back, go over here, get another car. And I go, oh, okay. So I get in the other car. I drive to the hotel, which is about a half an hour away. I go to the back seat to get my suitcase out. Suitcase was not there.
Oh, no.
I left it in the first rental car, right? So, of course, I have all sorts of feelings about that. And then I say, okay, let's suck it up, Buttercup, right? This is what you did. And I was a little forgiving with myself. I was both frustrated with myself and forgiving with myself. And I had to drive back to the airport and go and say, I left the suitcase and get it, right? It took an extra hour of my time. But if I were a kid and I'd done that, I didn't want an adult to then say, like, why'd you do that?
Right.
Right.
Why did you look at the back seat before you got into the other?
Right. Yeah. And when I got home and I told my husband that, he said, oh, I can so imagine doing that. Right. That just immediately, I said, I know, gosh, right. Because we're human beings and problem solving happens in the context of things not going perfectly.
Right.
Problem solving doesn't happen in the context of everything falling into place.
There's a great quote from, I'm currently teaching a parents of teenager course, and this quote from Mark Twain that is, good judgment comes from experience and experience comes from bad judgment.
That's
so
great.
I think it's really important to remember in the context of problem solving.
So important. Yeah. He's got a lot of great quotes. One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes when I'm giving a talk on managing anxiety and teaching kids these skills. And I know that I'm going to hear, make sure they know everything ahead of time and teach them how to, basically teach them how to distract themselves. And I will say, as I start the training, Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they've been fooled. So I am going to tell you a lot of things that are different than what you've heard. And I want you to just let that discomfort be there because it's hard. It's hard when you believe that you're doing the right thing and somebody says, no, that's actually making it worse.
Right.
Ugh. Yeah.
Oh, so frustrating. And on that note, two of these things, especially autonomy and problem solving, require an enormous leap of faith for parents. And that, the reason why parents don't want to give autonomy or they want to solve their kids' problems is because they love them so much and they want them to be happy and safe. And what do you say to parents about that leap of faith?
Oh, well, that's the gist of parenting, isn't it? Right? Is that the minute that you have that little baby, that child, however that child comes into your life, at whatever point that child comes into your life, it is one big, huge leap of faith. And so I talk to parents a lot about the fact that I completely and totally understand that they are trying to prevent their distress and they're trying to prevent their child's distress. There's actually something called parental experiential avoidance, to throw another researchy term at you. And that the hardest thing about parenting is stepping back and letting your child not be okay, right? Not be in danger, but stepping back and letting your child not be okay. The analogy, I love the Mark Twain quote that you gave, and the way that I talk about it is that you don't know you can get over a broken heart until you have a broken heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so we want to let kids, it is such a big leap of faith. Oh my gosh, this is why we need to have these conversations. This is why you need a support group of other people who are going through the same thing. This is why you need people around you that can say, oh, I know how that feels. That to have a parenting community or a parent that's a little ahead of you in the game. I remember being with Reed Wilson, my pal Reed Wilson, and we were on some trip doing something, and I'm telling him about my 15-year-old son, and he says to me, because his kids are older, he's older than me, and he says to me, so you know he has a whole life that you know nothing about, right? And I was like, yeah, of course. And inside I was like, what? Yeah. But him just saying that, it was just acknowledgement of like, this is really hard, and this is what's coming your way. It's a huge leap of faith, and it comes from the place of, like you say, the place of love, the place of fear, oftentimes, the place of wanting your kids to be okay. And it's small adjustments matter. So if you feel overwhelmed by this, if you feel like, oh my gosh, I could never do what Lynn's talking about, or I listen to Sarah and I could never do what Sarah's talking about, small adjustments matter, right? It's course correction, course correction, course correction.
I love that. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
I have one question that I ask all my guests, and that is, if you could go back in time to your younger parent self, just those new little guys that you've got, what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself that it's a long haul, and that the most important thing that you can model for your kids is joy. And make sure that you are having moments, not all the time, because it's not possible, but make sure that you are having moments of fun and moments of silliness and moments of just laughing so hard that you can't breathe. Parenting is about joy. And that's what we want to make sure that we're giving. That's what I would have told myself. I think we did a pretty good job about that, but it would have been nice if, every once in a while somebody would have knocked on the door and I would have answered it, and they would say, hi, just a little reminder, have moments of joy. And I would have been, I probably at that moment would have said like, fine, and slammed the door in their face. But parenting is about moments of joy. Yeah. Modeling that and creating that. Yeah.
I love that. Can you tell my listeners where they can find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah. So my website is lynlyons.com. I have the podcast Flusterclux, which I think you may have mentioned with an X. So that's available. We drop episodes every Friday. On my website, there's all sorts of videos, and there's some courses you can take, but also just, stuff that I put up there, blog articles and things. I'm on Twitter. Lynn Lyons MSW is my Twitter handle. And then you can find me on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so great.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Before we say goodbye today, I just want to remind you to sign up for the free workshop that's coming up, Peaceful Discipline, How to Raise Great Kids Without Yelling, Threats, or Punishment. Hop on over to sararosensweet.com/peaceful to reserve your free spot at the live workshop, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I hope you found this conversation insightful and exactly what you needed in this moment. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Remember that I'm rooting for you. I see you out there showing up for your kids and doing the best you can. Sending hugs over the airwaves today. Hang in there. You've got this.